Today on Upfront, should there be limits on how much money you can give a candidate? Next, the lawsuit that seeks to overturn a state campaign finance law. Attorney Rick Essenberg on why conservatives say caps on contributions limit free speech. Then a long-shot campaign for governor. Why is Democrat Brett Hulsey running in the August primary? Plus, from Wisconsin to Washington, how much time members of Congress spend back home?
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Upfront. Our campaign finance laws in Wisconsin on their last legs. For decades, the state has had regulations in place that limit how much individuals, political action committees, and parties can give to candidates. But critics say these laws limit free speech. Now, a new lawsuit is challenging the limits on contributions by political action committees. The Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty filed a suit on behalf of Citizens for Responsible Government. And we're talking now with Rick Essenberg, the president and general counsel for WILL, as it's known. Thanks to Rick Essenberg for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you on the program. Briefly, explain what this lawsuit is about.
Well, the United States Supreme Court has made it clear that there's only one reason that the government can ever limit the amount of money that people contribute to candidates for public office, and that is to avoid the appearance or the risk of what's called quid pro quo corruption, kind of a play for pay concept. And the United States Supreme Court earlier this year said that that justification does not allow the state to limit the number of lawful political contributions that an individual can make. So if the state decides that it doesn't present the risk of corruption for somebody to give $500 to a candidate for assembly, then the United States Supreme Court says you can't limit the amount of candidates that an individual can make a lawful contribution to. We filed a lawsuit on behalf of a guy named Fred Young and got the state's aggregate limit knocked out. And now we're filing a lawsuit on behalf of a political action committee, a grassroots political action committee, because state law also says the candidates can receive only a certain number of lawful contributions from political committees. And the question that we're asking is, why does it matter to our client? Why are they prohibited from exercising their First Amendment rights just because other committees have also decided to support the same candidate?
This seems to be all part of a larger discussion that's happening in Wisconsin right now, and it's really about financing of public speech. So where do we draw the line, or should there be any line? Should individuals, organizations be allowed to give as much as they want to whomever they want?
Well, you know, I've increasingly come to the view that, that they should, and that if we're concerned at all about the possibility of corruption, that the proper remedy is disclosure. That is, let's find out where the money is coming from. Because the problem is that our history of campaign finance over the past 40 years has been, you know, we plug a hole and a new hole opens up, right? Somebody said it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole and there's an endless supply of moles. Money will always find a way, because the government does things that people care passionately about. And they want to be able to speak about those issues and about elections. And they will find a way to spend money in order to speak. And so what we've done is we have essentially empowered independent groups to spend as much money as they want, conveying their own messages at election time, because the Supreme Court has essentially, said you can't limit what people can, spend to talk about issues at elections. And we have disempowered candidates, because the Supreme Court said you can limit contributions. And so now, every election cycle, it's not the candidates who control the message, it's independent organizations. And I think we need to realize that, we've distorted the process, that disclosure is the answer, not limitation and restriction.
So disclosure is okay with you, because there are some people who don't even like the idea of disclosure.
I think disclosure is okay if it's narrowly tailored. And the problem with disclosure, right, and the Supreme Court has said disclosure is okay, but there's a problem if disclosure laws are going to facilitate harassment and retaliation. So I would say to people who are in favor of disclosure, if you want disclosure, then don't embark on campaigns to boycott people who have a different political perspective than you do. Or don't put their homes up on Google Maps so that people can harass them. Because if that type of thing happens, then it's quite clear under our constitutional cases that the Supreme Court may say, well, if that's what disclosure is going to facilitate, if it's going to facilitate people being harassed or punished because they've decided to speak, then there's a First Amendment problem.
Let me push back on this argument that you make that fewer regulations would be better. There are people who say, look, when we allow money to influence elections in races that really have very few restrictions or regulations, when we allow that, we are essentially just disenfranchising the average person who cannot afford to contribute to these candidates, who cannot afford to get the same sort of access that people who give large sums of money do, that we're fueling this deep cynicism in the public. What do you say to that?
Well, the problem is that we have a First Amendment, and it's very difficult to envision robust First Amendment protection that says that when it's election time, when the public is listening, that you can't talk about the issues. Now, people say all the time, well, money is not speech. But the difficulty with that position is that it would be a meaningless First Amendment right to speak if all I could do is stand on the street corner and yell at the cars as they went past. The fact of the matter is that you need to spend money to speak. And if you look at the impact of money on elections, the fact is that both sides pretty much can raise the same amount of money, and that the correlation between who spends the most money and who actually wins is very, very weak.
You don't believe that people become less inclined to participate in the process because they really don't feel like their opinion or their voice matters?
I think that their opinion or their voice is not limited by the fact that we have a robust discussion. I mean, however we do this, the fact of the matter is that political campaigns are going to be financed by a relatively small number of people. I mean, even if you look at the contribution levels that exist for candidates today, most people have no interest in making political contributions at any level, much less the relatively low amounts that are maximum contributions in statewide races. So that's always going to be the case. But nevertheless, politicians need votes, not dollars, and they're going to have to be responsive to public opinion regardless of who's financing the debate.
I've got just a couple of seconds left. As you look out into the future, this discussion seems to be moving in one direction. Do you think the state's campaign finance laws will be rewritten significantly in the next few years?
Well, they have to be, because particularly after the Seventh Circuit's recent decision, they're a hash. There are a lot of things that are in the law that have either been declared unconstitutional or clearly are unconstitutional given what the courts have said, and so people who are trying to make decisions about what they can and can't do can't pick up the law book, look at it, and be confident that what they're doing is permitted or not permitted. And so it's absolutely imperative, no matter how you feel about this issue, that our campaign finance laws in this state be rewritten.
Rick Essenberg is the President and General Counsel for WILL, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. It's good to have you on the program. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Coming up next, the Democratic primary for governor. There is one. State lawmaker Brett Hulsey on his long shot campaign to win the Democratic nomination. That's when Up Front continues.
Up Front with Mike Gousha, brought to you by American Transmission Company.